Good morning, everyone. I was able to get my hands on the much-hyped 2024 Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 a little bit early by leaving the United States for the more preferred motorcycle market of Scotland. I found a rental outfit called Biker B&B in Edinburgh that bought this one 2 months ago, and it already has 6,600 miles on the clock, so it's well broken in at this point. Biker B&B was great to work with, and I wouldn't hesitate to use them again. They also offer tours if that's more your speed. I'm not affiliated in any way, I just think they're doing a great job in a tricky business. Anyway, I got to ride Royal Enfield's latest creation for 1,400 plus miles around the beautiful west coast of Scotland. The only downside is that Scotland has no legal off-road riding, not even public gravel roads. But what it does have are windy little single-lane roads with pull-offs for passing. If you haven't ridden these before, they are great fun and require you to be on your toes at all times. Anyway, let's see how the little 450 got on. In spite of all the hype around this bike, or perhaps due to it, I was initially unimpressed. Maybe it's the direct comparison to the buttery smooth Tenere 700 and the excitable but still pretty smooth Husky 401. The Enfield's engine buzzes quite a bit between 5,000 and 6,000 RPM, which is right where it sits in 6th gear at 65 miles per hour. The windscreen creates quite a bit of buffeting on the helmet at higher speeds, which doesn't help the experience. It seems happiest to putt around at 4,500 RPM, and it really doesn't like to lug either. I was surprised how much throttle it needs to get moving smoothly. First gear is probably a little bit higher than I would have expected for something meant to climb high mountain passes. It is not a sporty bike. When you push it to accelerate quickly, it feels a little bit reluctant to do so. The engine doesn't egg you on in the same way that the KTM 390 does. I'll admit that I haven't ridden the previous 411 Himalayan, so I can't do a comparison to that bike. But from all accounts I've heard, it is much more agricultural and unrefined, so I'm sure that the new 450 impresses compared to the air-cooled 411. The Himalayan is very stable, but at the expense of wanting to turn. It took more effort to turn than I expected, and I found that I would have to be deliberate in getting the bike to go where I wanted. I noticed my arms were a bit sore at the end of a long day of these narrow, windy roads, which isn't something that I had experienced while road riding on any other bike before. It definitely does not have that telepathic feeling that some bikes do, where it goes right where you want with seemingly no effort or corrections. I did notice that the fork caps were level with the top of the triple tree, so there's a good chance that sliding the forks up a bit will help with this. But not my bike, so I wasn't going to mess with it. The stock Seat front tire tramlines more than any I've experienced. It's possibly due to the fact that it's nearing the end of its life, but man is it bad. Between the heavy handling and this tire, I found I had to pay more attention than expected to keep the bike going where I wanted. Like middle management levels of micromanaging. Come to think of it, I'm sure this front tire isn't helping the handling of the bike either. Whoever gets this bike next will have the joy of a brand new Continental TKC 70 front to match the rear, because it was toast by the end of my ride. The front brake is not great. It takes quite a bit of force in the lever and feels a bit vague, but it isn't quite KLR bad. You can still do it with 2 fingers.
That's what she said!
Contrastingly, the rear is almost too powerful. If it weren't for the ABS, I'm sure I would have been leaving accidental black lines everywhere. I'm pretty sure the front and rear have the same size rotors. The front needs a more aggressive pad, and the rear less so at the very least. I bet a bigger rotor will be available before too long in the aftermarket as well. At least the Himalayan comes with steel braided lines, so that isn't something that needs to be upgraded. Honestly, why isn't this standard on all motorcycles at this point? All of the braking components are from Brembo's subsidiary, Bybri, which typically seem to offer decent value for money. I did notice that the rubber boot on the front brake pressure switch was already showing some dry rot, which was surprising given that this bike is only around 2 months old. The Showa suspension is one area where this bike is excellent. It absorbs bigger hits happily without bottoming out, but it is pretty damn smooth over sharp edges, which is remarkable for this class of bike. It is non-adjustable, but it just seems to work. I didn't get to take it on any dirt trails, unfortunately, but I did find a rutted section at one of my accommodations, and the Himalayan handled it without any drama. I'd have loved to do more off-pavement riding, but that just isn't possible in Scotland without owning a significant tract of land in the Highlands. In the absence of gravel roads, I did get to exploit the little gravel patches on the side of the road while playing the single-lane, two directions of traffic game. Despite not being able to fully test it, I feel like this little bike will take you just about anywhere a mid-size adventure bike will. The standing position is comfortable for me at 6 feet tall, and the rear brake pedal is quite large and easy to use while standing, which will benefit newer riders and those who are learning to become more confident controlling the bike while standing. I was happy that the seat had a high position so that even with my long legs, my knees were never grumpy at the end of the day, but for my taste, the seat is a little too slanted toward the tank. I tried to arrange the seat so that the front was in a higher position than the rear, but it was just not secure that way. Oh well, worth a try. It's really nice that they have two different seats available with two settings for each to accommodate as many people as possible. Especially since this bike will be popular among those looking to start venturing off pavement or touring bumpy back roads. The Himalayan feels pretty easy to do tight, low-speed maneuvers, which is one of those areas that typically gets overlooked as soon as you pass your moto test. It is a very tight turning circle, which is a bonus on the narrow little roads of Scotland. The kickstand leans the bike way over, which is a double-edged sword. It takes some force to stand the bike up, especially if the kickstand is even slightly downhill, but the bike is still quite stable if you have to park with the kickstand slightly uphill, or go for a ferry ride. The center stand takes serious effort to deploy for a bike this size, and getting it off the center stand wasn't the easiest either. I guess it is still pretty portly for a 450. Another item of note is the wheels. While this example has tubed spoked wheels, I understand that tubeless spoked wheels will be available as an option, which is quite remarkable at this end of the market. And if the comment section of my tire and tube change video are anything to go by, some people feel very, very strongly about the necessity of having tubeless tires. The round TFT dash is also quite nice to look at. It displays all the information you need, but the fuel gauge is a little too seamless. I often found myself surprised when I saw a quarter tank or less, having not noticed its progress. The interface also needs some work. It is not terribly intuitive, and while I figured out how to reset the trip meter, I could not figure out how to set the clock, which was frustratingly an hour and a half ahead of actual time. Not great for trying to time ferry crossings. At nighttime, it switches to black, which is nice, but a couple times I noticed it changing its mind on what mode to be in. There is the possibility to connect with an app on your phone, but I couldn't be bothered to try it out. Call me a Luddite, but phone-bike connectivity is not something that terribly interests me. The Himalayan has 2 throttle modes and 2 ABS modes, which are combined to make 4 ride modes: Performance, with and without rear ABS, and Eco, with and without rear ABS. Turning off rear ABS predictably lets you slide the rear tire. They are accessed using the right thumb button while stopped. I tried changing modes while riding, but that caused an error and I couldn't change modes again until I turned the bike off and on again.
Hello, IT? Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Alright, let's try Eco mode. Eco mode just requires a lot more throttle input to do the same thing. I don't think there's much of a point to use this mode, since the throttle on is already very smooth in performance mode. I mean, I suppose you could save some fuel with it, but it already does well enough. 841 liters, 152.9 miles. The fuel economy was not too bad. It ranged from 61 to 71 miles per gallon US, with an average of 67 miles per gallon. With the 4.4 gallon tank, this gives a maximum range of 260 to 300 miles, depending on how you ride. I found the fuel range would report a quarter tank when there was about 1.5 gallons left. Something seems to have happened to the mirror. And this is now. Alright. Luckily, it was easy to tighten the right one back up without tools, but I couldn't get the left one into a useful position for the whole trip. They aren't the best. They're a bit buzzy as well. Fortunately, mirrors are a very easy thing to change. The headlight is a nice, pleasing round shape, and the performance seems on par with most current motorcycles. Not quite bright enough to do any serious night riding, but enough to work in a pinch. I will note that it was both dark and rainy, which is the worst combination for being able to actually see anything. And the GoPro doesn't help it out at all. The headlight controls are different than what I'm used to. Flash to pass is on the same knob instead of the usual index finger location, which made it annoying to use. And in the place of a normal flash to pass button was a home button for the dash. The windshield is very small, but it manages to introduce quite a bit of buffeting at higher speeds. It feels worse than a naked bike. I think it needs one of those little winglets or an entirely new windshield if you're going to spend any amount of time on the highway. So, I know I've been pretty critical about this bike, and after the first 2 days of riding, I was actually pretty disappointed in it. But after the third day, I realized that the Himalayan 450 is functionally a 7/8 scale KLR. And I don't mean that as an insult. I did have one for 10 years and 88,000 miles. It has a big 17-liter tank, 8 inches of suspension travel, and about 40 horsepower. It does no task especially well, but it will do all of them well enough. On the motorway, it has the power to happily cruise at 75 miles per hour, with a little reserve for passing. It won't be the most comfortable experience, but it will get you there. It will absolutely take you down a twisty road, though it does not reward or encourage a fast pace like some other bikes do. It did great on what little off-pavement I could find, but it feels a little on the heavy side at 432 pounds. Aesthetically, though, the Himalayan is much better looking. Seriously, it's a handsome bike. I got lots of compliments on it from strangers throughout the trip, and it pulls off that classic motorcycle look quite well. Royal Enfield has combined the brake lights and turn signals, which I haven't seen before on a production bike, but maybe I wasn't paying attention. As I spent more time on the bike, I began to enjoy it more. It became my companion for the trip, and it excelled on narrow, winding roads, especially when I was not in a rush to get anywhere. And after the first 2 days of the trip, where, looking back on it, I was in a nonsensical rush to get to the Isle of Skye, I was able to slow down a little bit and focus on the incredible setting in which I found myself. Since it doesn't encourage pushing the bike to the limit, you are left with more brain power to appreciate where you are. For part of this trip, I retraced part of the NC 500 that I had done 9 years ago on a BMW F800R. But apart from Applecross Pass, it was like riding it for the first time. I hardly remembered any of it. Maybe my memory's partly to blame, but I also think that since I was doing 300 miles a day on these tiny roads, my full attention was being consumed by piloting the bike. Not having a huge daily mileage to complete left me with more opportunities to explore and wander down dead-end roads, of which there are many in Scotland. By the end of the trip, I became quite fond of the Himalayan for being a great conduit to wander around and explore. It didn't make the trip about the bike. It fosters that feeling of being immersed in the environment that draws me so much to motorcycle travel. It's just you and the elements, for better or worse. This brings us to the real question. Who is this bike for? If you are a new rider biased toward dirt trails and single track, one of the 300 dual sports is likely a better choice. And if you're looking to do more road biased touring, something like the Honda CB500X is more up your alley. But I think this would make a great first bike for someone looking to explore both on and off pavement. It has broad capabilities, so even if you aren't yet sure where you fall on the motorcycle pavement spectrum, the Himalayan won't be a limiting factor, for a good while anyway. My first bike was a KLR, which is one of the famous do-it-all bikes, but the KLR feels a bit big and ungainly by comparison. The Himalayan is smaller, with a lower seat height, and feels like a much better platform to learn on. I'm not sure I can think of a scenario where the KLR would be a better choice than the Royal Enfield, except for very tall riders. Had this been available 13 years ago, I would have been better served by starting out on one of these instead. Besides, it already has crash bars, so with the addition of handguards and maybe a skid plate, it won't matter if it gets dropped at low speed, which inevitably happens to all new riders. certainly those venturing off pavement. I know my KLR took a lot of naps while learning to ride off-road. Apart from new riders, I think this will suit a small group of more experienced riders who are looking to explore but aren't terribly concerned with ultimate performance, and don't spend much time overall on the highway. Those who have a mindset to relax and just enjoy the ride and scenery. I'm not saying this bike can't be ridden quickly, but there are lots of bikes out there that are better for that. I asked the owner of Biker B&B about reliability, and over its first 8,000 miles, the 450 hasn't needed anything except a rear tire, and it doesn't burn a drop of oil, which couldn't be said for the older air-cooled versions, which seemed to require a bit more fiddling. So, would I buy one? No, I don't think so. It doesn't do anything better than my Tenere 700, and for road riding, the Svartpillen 401 is much more engaging, if slightly more painful over bumps. But I would definitely consider renting the Himalayan again the next time I'm in Scotland. If you're still here, thanks for coming along, and don't forget to subscribe for more stuff like this and more videos about this trip to Scotland.